The Power Hour is on the air, coming to you live on Facebook and YouTube. I want to thank you for joining me for this special morning show, and I'm super excited to jump in all the topics we have today. First off, let's get started with what our three segments will be for the day. We've got Derrick Henry coming in the season, trying to challenge Eric Dickerson's all-time rushing record. Can he do it this year? I'll break that down and give you my take on it. Also on the second segment, the Chicago Bears moving out of Chicago. We'll talk about that, where their possible new home may be, and the pros and cons of it. We'll also talk about it in the third segment, and our final one of the night, or the day. We'll talk about how we can improve the NFL in 5 easy steps where I think it can be just fixed. And we'll go and break that down for you. Good morning and welcome to the Power Hour. I'm your host, Michael Bishop. Let's dive into it. When we talk about elite runners, we definitely have our fair share of who we feel is in that category. Some would say Barry Sanders, some would say Emmitt Smith, some would even say Eric Dickerson, just in this short amount of time that he accomplished so much in the 10 to 11 seasons he did play. But the one thing that does stand out, since 1984, Eric Dickerson has held the all-time rushing record in a single season, which broke down to about 2,105 yards. And he did that in 1984, and along with that, he averaged about 5.6 yards per carry and about 14 touchdowns on the ground. And the point being, that's just a record that has stood the test of time. And up until now, it seems like he could have held on to that record. Is Derrick Henry going to be the one to break through and challenge that? Well, let's break down a few facts first. The fact that Eric Dickerson's record has stood this long just shows how much the league has moved along from an evolution standpoint in the sense of play. It's a players' league that has moved on to become one that is heavily involved in the pass. So you've seen a lot of more passing yards being broken than you have rushing yards. And throughout time, you've seen a few handful of running backs that possibly could have broken that record at the time. A couple of guys have gotten close. I know Jamal Brown, definitely being one, was fairly close to breaking that. Well, I apologize, Jamal Lewis of the Browns. Coffee's kicking in, sorry. But I do remember when he was playing for the Browns, he came very close to breaking that. And a lot of people thought he would. But throughout the process of the season, he fell short, unfortunately. And the record stood. I know when Chris Johnson entered the league, there was a possibility that he could have broken it. And during his 2,000-yard campaign, almost came close in a game against the Seattle Seahawks. Unfortunately, it just never came to fruition. And once again, the record stood the test of time. So it just shows you've seen maybe a few rushers come close. And it didn't happen again until Adrian Peterson had the opportunity. And he broke through, but just came up short. It's amazing to me that there's many records, not only in football, but even around the league, that can just stand the test of time, and have. And the fact that this is a record for almost 37 years has basically been just one of the hardest records to break for a running back. It is just insane to me that it is one of the hardest records to try and break. And it's always seemed like it may happen, or it has almost happened in some cases. But the fact is, just the endurance and the hard work that's put in throughout the season, it's a testament to the men that have gotten close to that and not broken it. Just at how amazing they are athletically. But I do think that for the first time, it's very possible, in a long time even, that this record might be broken this year. And Derrick Henry being the number one choice to break the record is an easy decision to make. And I look at it from a few standpoints at what can make this happen. And first off, I think from the scheduling standpoint, the Tennessee Titans have a lot of games that they could really run on their opponents. And I say that because usually at the beginning of the season, it seems like you have to have the scheduling in your favor. And right off the bat, you definitely have a lot of scenarios where Tennessee can come in and make some plays on the ground. And fortunately, I think for some of their opponents that they match up against, they can do well, especially running the ball. You look at the season opener against Arizona. Now, they have a very good defense. But still, with the addition of Julio Jones, it now makes it even harder just to make the transition to try and stop Henry. Whereas it's going to switch off between Jones and Brown and Derrick Henry, and possibly even the role players of Reynolds and Farksher. So you've got a lot of playmakers that are really going to help open up the field for Derrick Henry. And there's no player in the history of the NFL that's really just gotten stronger as the game goes on. And I feel that's one of the bigger aspects moving forward. You look at Henry, and that's just why there's a reason why he gets so many touches late in games. I've never seen an athlete, at least from a football perspective, that's able to get out there and make the plays that he needs to help the team win. And I'll give credit where credit's due. The man puts in the work to get his body ready for the season. I mean, we've all seen him work out. We've all seen him handle business. He's ready to get out there. I don't want to be the one to tackle him. So, believe me, that man's putting the money where his mouth is. He's going to go out there and he's going to dominate the opponents. So, I really feel in that aspect, Tennessee has some early games where I think they'll get him a lot of running yardage. And on average, I think I had to break down the numbers, where Dickerson had to get about 5.6 carries to get to that total. Henry would have to get about, from my math standpoint, it was right around, and also add in the effect, I've taken consideration of the runs that he has had, and I've broken down each game from the last couple of years as he's progressed. Henry could average about 6.4 yards. And it's very impressive to me that even throughout the season, that could even improve. He could go up for maybe 7 or 8 yards a carry. That's how good he is. And against opposing defenses, it's imperative that they try and find a way to make that kind of stop. So the way Henry keeps moving throughout the game, he just gets stronger. There's nothing he can do that will hurt him other than them trying to load the box, which good luck with that, since you've got a playmaker in A.J. Brown, and now you have Julio Jones, which is going to make it even harder. So that's one of the reasons. Number two, I would look at, and I think this might be one of the most overlooked scenarios that could help Derrick Henry. Adding a 17th game, I think, is going to push him over the edge. And it's very easy, which I don't understand why you haven't seen a lot of analysts try and break this down, which I'm sure some have, but you don't hear a lot about it. And even for Derrick Henry, there's other players that might have an opportunity to break other records, but that's another show for another day. Focusing on the point at hand, I feel like you have a player where I've broken down, you're going to get about 6.4 yards a carry. And you add that extra game, he would have to get about roughly around 127 yards a game. So mathematically, that's not far-fetched to reach to the goal that he has to. I do feel he's going to have some games where he gets about 90. Maybe he'll get about 80 or even 70. But it's always against teams, especially right now, that are struggling at this point. I think against Jacksonville, he's still going to get his yards. I still think Houston, he's going to get his yards because you have two rebuilding teams. He's definitely going to get his yards on those teams. That's pretty much going to go without any kind of doubt. So long-term goal for Derrick Henry, I think you get about 127 per game, or if he averages over that, which I'm sure he will, that's definitely going to help the process of him getting to that goal. But in the sense of trying to accomplish that, it's really just a sense of the next point that I have to make. Can Derrick Henry stay healthy? Now, he hasn't shown anything where he hasn't had any health issues or he hasn't had any lingering issues. But let's face it, the elephant in the room as of this point is something going to happen, or is fate finally going to turn its ugly side of its head and basically say, well, here it is. And I'm sure that's what has most Tennessee Titan fans worried. It's easy to just kind of dismiss injuries, but let's face it, players get hurt all the time. Even in the sense where there's some things that they might be going through that we'll never hear about. That's one of the good reasons about players trying to keep things to themselves. There might be little aches and pains, and they're going to do everything they can to keep it under wraps. But in the bigger scheme of things, it's very hard to try and stay healthy throughout a 16-game season. And now with an extra game, you're really pushing the envelope. But at the same time, a guy that spends that much time taking care of himself, and he's still in his mid-20s, you have to feel a little more confident about the way he handles himself and the way things have gone so far. It's hard to see guys that strong and that elite get hurt, but it's not like it can't happen. And it's not like we want it to happen, let's be honest. The biggest aspect of that is it's easy to take into consideration that an injury is going to happen. And it's very likely. And we don't want to go there. But at the same aspect, there's things beyond our control that we can try and make work. Especially when the players are out there making plays. It's somewhat of a problem, especially when it happens and you really don't have a plan B. But I do feel that Henry is going to have his chance to do everything that he can to continue to make plays as long as he takes care of himself. And I haven't seen anything that's not going to hinder that. Best case scenario, he gets through the full season unscathed. And we all know the worst case scenario. But we try and keep positive on this show, and that's what I want everybody to realize. As much as the opportunity comes to break that record, sometimes you have to understand it may or may not happen. I think it's possible, Derrick Henry continues to show that he's a strong athlete. He continues to show adversity will never take him down, and he is the kind of player that's all about winning and in a team format. He's all about being a good teammate. And he's done so much for this team. And I feel that everything that he's done, sometimes you get a little good karma your way. I feel like you definitely get some things that balance out in the world. And the way Derrick Henry has handled himself on and off the field, I feel that it is not out of the possibility that he could break this record. It's very much possible. The biggest thing is it's going to come down to health, it's going to come down to schedule, and it's going to come down to just a little luck even. Derrick Henry has done everything that he has possibly could to put him in a position to put himself on top of that rushing board. And I think he can, and I think he will. In the long term of things, is it what is what is going to be best for the team? I guess is a real good question we should ask ourselves. What if he does get hurt trying to break the record? That's a very bad scenario. I think people just don't even want to visit in their head. But it's very much possible. Sometimes you have to take that chance, but in the long scheme of things, is it what's best? And that's definitely a resounding no. But I think just you have to give the player a chance to try and break the record if he has a chance. I don't think it's fair to hold him back. And a lot of guys talk about individual awards aren't anything, and I think that's true to some extent. But it's a pride thing, and it boils down to basically like, I didn't just do this myself, but my team helped me. And there's no running back in the league that doesn't give any kind of credit to their offensive line because they're the heartbeat of what made that transcend. Any running back will look back at those moments to where they got to the goal that they were trying to achieve and basically point out even the people that were helping make that possible. And Tennessee's offensive line, that's no problem. I think with Taylor Lewan back, they're going to anchor both corners. They're going to do their business, and they're going to make sure Derrick gets through the holes. And in the long term, I do see it's very possible that Henry can break this record. There's 17 games. There's a lot of early matchups against teams that aren't good at defending the run. There's going to be a lot of opportunities, especially going forward later in the season, where I think he can amass a lot more yardage, where he really gets good in the months of November and December. So I feel long term, if I had to give a yes or no answer, it's very much a sound yes. But I will say it's going to determine on the factors that I've mentioned: health, timing, and luck. And that's gone throughout the history of anyone that's tried to break this record. And the fact it shows why this record has stood for over 37 years. Will we see a new face on that illustrious rushing record? We'll find out soon after the season's over. But until then, I guess we'll just have to wait. Well, that's the end of our first segment. We'll go ahead and take a quick 30-second break. But when we come back, I plan on discussing Chicago. Are the Bears moving from Chicago? What will this do to the NFL, and where are they moving? And should they move? We'll be back in 30 seconds. This is the Power Hour. It is the Power Hour. We are on the air, live streaming to you on Facebook and YouTube. Whoa, that was a really good first segment. Definitely got a lot deeper into that than I wanted to. But there was a lot of good conversation pieces to get in. So I do kind of go on a tangent. So that's just part of the show. Sometimes I go a little longer on some of these segments. Sometimes I go a little shorter. But I'm sure we'll get it all figured out eventually. It's still the first week. Still feeling things out, but I'm glad you joined me this week, and especially on this morning show of the Power Hour. I'm your host, Michael Bishop, and we're getting into segment 2. The Chicago Bears have definitely been a staple in the NFL. Existing in this franchise since 1921, known as the Decatur Stanleys, until they changed their names and relocated. Now, Chicago has definitely been a football kind of town. In the fall, it definitely takes front stage, full and center. And throughout those times, you've seen a lot of great games. You've seen a lot of great teams. Mostly throughout the George Halas years, where he made them into the monsters of the Midway, where you had some of the greatest players, arguably, on defense ever play. Many of them going on and finding success and just building that brand of the Chicago Bear football. The Bears played at Wrigley Field. When in 1921 they moved in Wrigley, and they played there up until 1970. Where did they go, you say? Well, they moved right down the way to Soldier Field, which Soldier Field at the time, Soldier Field basically was open in 1924 and had been host to many other events and had many other people and teams in and out over the years, including even a major game back in the 1920s where Notre Dame, I believe, played Army. And at the time, Soldier Field was a very nice venue, but it never really had anybody permanent. So once the Bears left Wrigley, they moved right into Soldier Field. And they've been there ever since. And Soldier Field was basically the home of the Bears right up until this day. And there was a lot of great memories in Soldier Field. And especially if you remember fondly of the 1985 Bears, where you had Buddy Ryan and Mike Ditka's teams that just went out and wailed on people. Defensively, they were a nightmare. Offensively, Walter Payton was unstoppable. This was a team that comes around every once in a generation. And everything was put into place, and there's just so much great backstory between all the players and all the coaches. This was just a team that Chicago fell in love with. And moving forward, they went on and defeated the New England Patriots in the Super Bowl, capping off what was an amazing year. And in Soldier Field, some of those greatest games that Bears team was around played there, and it was very fondly remembered by lots of fans. And of course, after that, the Bears kind of just never really got back to that high point. And they've been kind of up and down. Which brings us to today, where it was announced basically that the Chicago Bears are very much interested in moving into the recently basically sold almost Arlington Park. Arlington Park, if you're not familiar, is a horse park, and it was owned by the Churchill Downs Company. They bought it in 1997, and at that point, they hosted a lot of horse racing. And it was a really nice venue, and up until this year, the group decided that they were going to sell the track, which is unfortunate because the track had been around since about 1924. And it had been fairly good for horse racing. And the track has made quite a bit of money, and it's had a little bit of fame towards it. If you're very familiar with the horse racing circuit, I'm sure Arlington Heights you definitely have a familiarity of. Going to Arlington Heights, that would be the town that the Bears are very interested in moving to, where Arlington Park is located. Now, Arlington Park is located about 26 minutes outside of the city. It's a small little suburban town, and the track's nestled a little outside of it. So, as of the moment right now, the Bears have put in a bid to move into Arlington Park. That would most likely possibly take place within the next few years, where they would have that bid, if approved, they would go ahead and get funding for the stadium that they're wishing to build, and it would be located there. Now, I have a few pros and cons for this. I think, first off, really, for the Chicago Bears, not to have any kind of home or any kind of stadium to call their own in their entire existence is laughable. Even teams that have relocated in certain aspects have had an opportunity to actually have a stadium to call their own stadium. I mean, the Raiders, it took nearly about 3 or 4 decades even to get their own stadium, where they weren't basically visitors just visiting and just signing leases just to get a place to just call home for a little while, where it seemed like Al Davis was never going to get a stadium of his own. That was laughable. But eventually, and unfortunately for some, it all came to a boil when Las Vegas was willing to take them in and build them a new state-of-the-art stadium. And in the NFL, that's become a part of everything now. Eventually, 20 or 30 years down the road, stadiums get older. They get a little more... They cost a little more money to try and take care of. And eventually, teams want to move just for a variety of reasons. Basically, some areas are cheaper. Some areas we're going to provide more stadium funds. Some areas are going to provide more tax breaks. There's a lot of reasons for it. But I think the main reason for the Chicago Bears move, and one of the pro moves, is they finally have a home of their own. For the longest time, the Bears have just been leasing in areas. They did with Wrigley Field, and they'd been doing it with Soldier Field. And eventually you get to a point where it's like, we're one of the teams that was the founding members of the NFL. We deserve better than this. The Green Bay Packers have had their own stadium. There's other teams in the league that have their own stadium that's bought and paid for. And in certain areas, other teams are having their own battles. And the Chicago Bears should not be one of them. And the fact that they are, it's almost laughable. The Bears aren't good right now. But for the history that they put up in the league, the fact that they're trying to have their own stadium, it's just mind-blowing. One of the things that I just don't understand in the long term is really why the Bears feel that they have to move in the first place. And I think going down the line, there's one of the biggest reasons is I just don't think that they feel appreciated. And that's understandable. But the problem is, there's been a lot of problems with the Bears organization over the last decade. There's been a little too much on and off. They've seemed to be good for a little while, and then they seem to get bad. And it kind of lasts a little longer than when they're good. So, in a sense, Arlington Heights would be a good move for them, just to have a place of their own. But I'm going to bring up the con of this problem right now. I've been to Soldier Field, and it breathes history. Even if you don't think 1970 has a lot of history to just breathe, it does. And with the Bears being there, they really had a lot of success, just as much as they did at Wrigley Field. Soldier Field definitely just has that kind of just past vibe. It has an old look, it has kind of a dated look, but it's not a bad thing. It kind of gives it that charm. And in some cases of certain stadiums, I think that's what makes Soldier Field so iconic. I can appreciate the fact that back in the 2000s when they did the renovations that they did, but that was back right when the turn of the century hit. And now they're in need of even more fixes. And is there going to be enough money to do that? And a resounding no, I don't think there will be. In some aspects, teams have to look at their facilities. They have to look at the long-term setting of what they're trying to do for their fans and move forward. And in the last 30 years, technology keeps advancing. That's just part of it. And NFL teams are trying to keep up with that, especially in a now more social world, and even in a social setting. They want their fans to be more comfortable. They want their players to feel more comfortable. And at that point, you have to have more updated facilities. Is it possible that Soldier Field could still pull a last-minute deal and maybe get a renovation done? Or maybe just pull down the stadium and just refurbish it? I don't know. That's a lot of questions to try and get answered. But it really just comes up to just the two meeting up and finding a way to make it work. Which, if Chicago's already looking at moving to Arlington Heights, it doesn't seem like that's going to really have any kind of long-term impact with the city. It seems like the Bears have made up their mind, and they want to go ahead and go through with this. And if they do, like I said, there's some good and some bad with it. I think the location that they've chosen is a good location. It's relatively small, but the area that they would be building in, I think that they could put a great stadium there. It's only about 26 miles away from Chicago, and I guess a lot of people would say, well, why would they still be called the Chicago Bears if they're 20 miles out of Chicago? Well, I could ask the same thing about the 49ers, or the Cowboys, or the Washington football team. I mean, their stadiums are nowhere near the cities. They're roughly about 15 to 30 miles away. And it all comes down to location, and it all comes down to price. Some areas are cheaper to build in. Some areas are willing to give a lot of breaks, tax-wise, even to the owners. Some areas are willing to put up more money. And I'm pretty sure Arlington Heights would be more than happy to. Especially if they could lure in the Chicago Bears and even possibly have them there for training camp, which that's been discussed as well. So there's a lot of reasons why Arlington Heights could be a good spot for the Bears. And there could be a few bad spots too. I mean, unfortunately, that would leave Soldier Field sitting empty. And it's a great location. It's a really great location. It's almost sad, the fact the city of Chicago would just let this kind of just transpire. If I knew that I had a chance to keep my team in the city, and it's a great area, the stadium's located in a great area, then that's worth trying to save. Especially the relationship that you've built in the city of Chicago over the last century. You have to understand that it's a situation where you know if you can try and mend the fences, it's worth doing. And you have to make sure that it works for both parties. And in this case, while it seems like the Bears' minds are made up and the bid's already put in, and it's only a matter of time till Arlington Heights decides who's the best option, I still feel that there's time for the two could possibly sit and hammer a deal out. I'm not sure if it'll happen, though. In the long-term scheme of things, it's going to depend on who's going to move to make it right. I generally think that it's going to come down to the city of Chicago. Do they want to keep the Bears? Are the Bears going to be willing to listen? It's not too late. I think the biggest thing right now is if both sides can sit down and work out a deal, they very well could stay at Soldier Field. The Arlington Heights thing's moving, but it's not official yet. It's not final. So, in the long-term things, I think Arlington Heights would be the best option for the Bears, in my opinion. They're going to get everything they've ever wanted. They're going to have a home that's their own, and a lot of other things that'll really kind of move things around, and change is a good thing. And if you're the Bears, I think it would probably be for the best to have this kind of change. It's not too late for Chicago, and maybe down the road they can work a deal out, and maybe they could get the stadium refurbished. Maybe they could find more money to even rebuild it if they had to. But it's going to come down to both sides, like I said. And will it happen? Could it happen? I don't know. But if the Bears feel content on moving, change isn't a bad thing. Sometimes it can be for the best. And if you're Arlington Heights, you really need to make sure you don't mess this one up. Because if you do have a chance to get this team, I would do everything that I can to just try and finalize that deal. But we'll see how it goes. Well, alright guys, that's the end of segment 2. We'll take a quick 30-second break, and when we come back, I've got 5 ways to fix the current NFL. How we can make it. This is the Power Hour, streaming to you live on YouTube and Facebook. I'm your host, Michael Bishop. Thanks for joining me this morning. It's been a really good show so far. And we finally come to our third and final segment of the evening. And I'm super excited to talk about this. And we all feel at some point the NFL does a good job, for the most part, of really handling business. Especially some of the rules that they have in place work. But there's a lot of them that don't. And we all have our ideas, and we have certain aspects of how we feel the league can improve. And the one positive thing of the league is they continue to find ways to get better. They continue to move the needle. And that's one of the reasons why the NFL is so successful. Through their failures, they tend to learn. Some of them may take a little longer than others. And it's really a crazy aspect of how they continue to move the needle. So I have 5 ways that I think could improve the NFL vastly. And I'd like to touch on those for the last segment. And the first one I have to start out with would be the overtime rule. And it's a very obvious one. I don't think it's too hard to try and just push aside or even just say it doesn't exist. We all want overtime to be a little more exciting. No one wants to come to a 4.5-hour game and leave after a tie. That's not worth the price of admission. There's nothing exciting about a tie. I'm sure most soccer fans would even agree, they don't want to see a tie. There's nothing about it that just screams excitement. And the NFL, and even in this day and age, is just too good to be trying to put games together at the end of a regulation and have it come out ending just 0-0 or 7-7. That's no way that a league should end a game. So how would you go about fixing the overtime system? Well, as of right now, I still think the best way at this point is to continue to put in place a system where each team does get a chance to have the ball. Now, while it's still practice at this point, I still feel that it should go to the college rule setting. Basically, each team has it on the 20, and the first one that scores gets the next team a chance to score on the other side. And then moving forward, you would have to go about adding other little amenities, like they would have to go for 2, say, during the third possession, or they would have to continue to go for 2 after that. I feel that it works, but there's still little things you can do to tweak it. To me, I feel each team does deserve a chance to get the ball, and they've been doing that. But the way I think they need to do it is to just get it done as fast as possible. Everybody wants to see a conclusion that works out for everybody. Even if they have to put in possession where each team has to try and score a touchdown. Field goals are of no help here. If you try and kick a field goal, it shouldn't count. I think it's basically a touchdown, you win. You can put each team like on the 35-yard line, give them the attempt to try and score, and I think that works out. You know, the game doesn't have to end on a field goal. It gives each team possession. It gives everybody a chance to try and move the ball and try and make it a little more interesting. And that's what fans want to see even during the regular season. It's hard to ask people to sit down and just to be comfortable for about a 4.5-hour period and think that it's all right. There's no reason that the NFL needs ties. And there's better ways to end the game. There's no reason why they can't just tweak what's in place already. And I think you put the ball on the 35, each team has an opportunity to score a touchdown. That's all there is to it. That puts it right there. You know, there's no field goal. And if it keeps scoring right at the third overtime, you implement the 2-point conversion. That'll help move the narrative. So going with that, I feel it's a little more exciting. It keeps the fans more engaged, and you definitely feel a little more relief that you actually don't know if your team won or lost. I mean, no one wants to see your team lose, but no one wants to see them tie either. All right. The second thing I would improve right at this point, I think is a big problem, is the penalty runoff. And I do not like the fact when a team has a penalty, especially if it's close to the end of the game, that the 10-second runoff is put into place. I really feel like that's a disservice to the fans. It's very insulting that you have a team that's trying to get in position to possibly tie or win the game, and a penalty happens, and in the sense where there's no timeouts, that a 10-second runoff's put into play. I do not like that at all. To me, I just feel like that's the biggest slap in the face to any kind of fan. You're just robbed of time, and that's just an easier way to end the game. And I don't appreciate that. You know, there's better ways to do things. And I want to make sure that the game's played fair on each aspect. I don't understand running off the clock for a 10-second period that's going to make anything better. I want teams to have a chance to win. Even if my team's in the lead, I still feel like I'd kind of like to see what would happen in 10 seconds. You could possibly even see like an amazing play happen that ends up being in highlights forever if you had that 10 seconds. I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility. So you really just kind of feel robbed in that kind of situation. And I've never been a fan of it. And it's been explained, and I still don't like the explanation of it. It's not anything that should be an effective motive to try and end a game early because of just something just so minuscule. I really want to see along the lines teams try and push each other to the final seconds. It's easy to just try and dismiss something as much as a penalty and then punish the team that did it by just taking time away from them. I mean, I want it fair on both sides. I want to see each team have an opportunity to try and win the game as fairly as possible. And it's not going to be anything relatively good if you can try and make that just the situation. In fairness, it's a rule that needs to be eliminated. I don't see any point in it being around anymore. And it just seems just unfair one-sidedly. If you have to do something about those kind of penalties, just penalize them yards. I mean, that's not going to hurt anything but just the yardage situation. I can live with that. I just don't like seeing time taking off the clock, and then you didn't get to see that 10 seconds. Would they have done something with it? I don't know. No one knows, and that's the problem. But I would rather see that 10 seconds, even if they can't get lined up and the clock runs. To me, I just feel robbed. And I'm sure there's other fans out there that feel robbed. So I think that's a rule that also needs to be eliminated. If you get rid of that, I think that helps a lot of things. And really, I hope they get rid of it soon. It just seems just so redundant. Third thing I would love to see the NFL try to do that I think would improve it. I'd really like to see them kind of cut down on just live interviews, especially after games. If they want to condense it down to maybe just a coach, that's fine. And the reason I say that is, on both sides of the ball, we know what happened. One of the teams won, one of the teams lost. And throughout the game, we kind of know what happened as well. Either one team executed the plays they needed to, one team didn't. And you have to see from a kind of perspective, I think the coach and the players, they're not always going to want to go up and talk about it, especially if they lost. And sometimes if they win, they know they won. We know they won. I'm sure they're excited. We see they're excited. I just think it's kind of overdone. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I think it's fine if players want to talk about it. But in the grand scheme of things, I mean, what else is there to say? I mean, they're just saying what we're already thinking. It's like, we won. We executed the plays better. We played defense better. We were more efficient on offense. We made less penalties. I mean, it's the same stuff every team says week in and week out. It's not like it changes. The narrative of the game is to win, and even the team that loses, they're going to basically say what they didn't do right. That's on all ends. And I mean, what if you're a team that's like not won a game all season? You kind of get tired of talking about it. I mean, you have to feel for the teams that go winless or win one game. I mean, it's easy to want to talk to the players and see what their take is on everything, and that's fine. But at the same time, it just seems so played out. I mean, I wouldn't mind just seeing the head coach discuss it and just one player of interest. I think that would work. But there's just so many other interviews, and not a lot of players want to discuss what happened, especially if they lose. And even if they won, I'm sure they're just going to celebrate just briefly and they're going to get back to work. Because that's what it is. And, I mean, you can call me old-fashioned for that, but I mean, in my perspective, it just seems so played out. If you're going to do interviews, interview the coach and interview one player. I think that makes it easier on everybody. I think it keeps everything a little transcendent. And it's not playing things down, or even it feels dumbed down for everybody else. We know what happened. We were there for 4 hours. We watched the game, so it's not like anything just snuck up on us on the last second. So, if you would do that, NFL, that'd really make things a little easier for everybody. I feel that it'd make things a little easier. You don't have to play down to us. It's just, keep it simple. That's all I'm saying. My next thing is to improve the NFL. And I'd really like to see this just implemented. And I know in some places it's going to be hard to pull off. But I wouldn't mind seeing this. I'd like to see at least every city get to host the Combine and or the draft. It's perfect weather everywhere. In April and May, whenever it goes down, I feel like you've got a lot of great weather around there, and I appreciate the NFL really doing this and reaching out to other cities. I mean, it was a huge success in Philadelphia and in Chicago and in Nashville where they had it, and I'm sure everybody had a good time in Vegas. I'd like to see this continue to circulate, but I'd like the NFL to try and get most of the cities that have franchises to do this. It really puts perspective on the fans going to different areas. And I think that's good for the league. It helps bring light to the other teams in the area. It shows the cities in general where they'll be hosting the events. And there's a lot of cool things in some of these cities. I mean, I think they should move the draft to a different city every year. But not just the draft. I'd like to see the NFL Combine be moved around to different cities each year. Let the kids that are going through the draft process go somewhere where they're possibly going to be playing, or maybe even visit as a certain member of a certain team. It gives it more insight and it gives it more depth. And it's not just the same old, same old. Granted, some venues are a little dated than others, and it possibly wouldn't work unless something was done from a financial standpoint to build a better situation or a better stadium in order for them to do that. But every year it's an Indy, and not every player is going to be playing on turf. Not every player is going to be playing in a domed environment or an indoor stadium. It's not going to happen. So it's easier to get a grasp of what some of these players are going to go through on a long-term basis. Give them a chance to play out in the open. Give them a chance to play on grass. I know you risk weather, but at the same time, it's April or March when you'll probably be doing this. So it's not worth a risk. It's a change, and it's a good change. It gets more people excited about it. It opens up conversation, and other areas get a chance to actually host, which is what the NFL should give a chance. And I think that's fine. That opens up a whole perspective, and it opens up a lot more revenue for a lot of these areas, especially during that time. And the smaller businesses, especially in those cities, will appreciate it. They're going to get a little piece of the cake, so move it around. Keep it interesting. Next point up, and I think this is important. Some cities get to host the Super Bowl. Some cities shouldn't host the Super Bowl. Let's face it, the Super Bowl is always going to fall in February. And my question is, where would you want to go in February? Well, you want to go somewhere warm. I get the fact that you want to host Super Bowls in these newer stadiums. When they did it in Minnesota, I was just so lost. It's like, yes, it's a beautiful stadium, but it's like 3. I don't want to go somewhere where it's 3 degrees outside for a week. That's not anything that sounds fun. I want to go somewhere warm. And the cities that do the Super Bowl the best, I think, are Miami. I think Houston's done a good job. I think New Orleans does a very good job. I would love to see how it'll turn out in Los Angeles. I think Arizona hosts good Super Bowls. I think those cities should be exclusive, just because of the location. Now, I'm not trying to down anybody that lives up north or has a team they represent up north. I don't have a problem with them. I just have a problem with the weather. And as a fan, if I'm going to that city to see my team play, or just a casual fan going up there, no one wants to go and sit in cold weather. No one wants to pay over $1,000 and sit in the cold. Like if it was in New York. Or no one wants to go to Minnesota and try and just stay warm as much as you can indoors. And then when you go outside, it's -6. To me, that's just something fans that are putting a lot of hard-earned money into that they probably don't even have in the first place. I know some of them don't. It's just not a good sense for them. It's not something that's a good investment on their part. You want the Super Bowl to be enjoyable. You want them to go out into the city and enjoy themselves. And there's nothing comfortable about going somewhere where you have to wear a thick coat just to go eat. So I feel if the NFL would do that, you're definitely thinning things out. But you know you're going to have great weather for the game. You've got good locations there. And they've already hosted some pretty good games. And I'm sure there's a couple of other stadiums that I couldn't think of off the top of my head that would probably be good stadiums to host as well. My thing is, if it's February and you know it's going to be negative weather or you're going to have to wear a coat just to get outside just throughout the whole week, it's really not in your best interest. Go warm. Everybody loves warm. And I think finally, the last one I have, and it's just something that I think, and I know a lot of other people probably disagree to a certain extent, but I feel one thing the NFL needs to do, and just for the success of the league, and I don't see it happening anytime soon, but I think San Diego needs an expansion team. And I say this because I feel I've met San Diego fans, and they're very passionate. They're a good fan base. They're a very good fan base. I've never met a bad San Diego fan. I'll put it to you that way. And the fact that they moved to LA, I get the business aspect of it. But they had more history in San Diego than they ever did in LA, even when they were in LA the first time. Are they going to be successful there? I don't know. But while I see the other cities of Oakland and I see San Diego, I definitely think San Diego got the worst of it. Oakland had been used to it. They've gone through it before. And, I mean, to me, I just feel San Diego could have done better. With Oakland, it just seemed, well, it was probably going to happen anyway. But San Diego just it was so bad, and it just could have worked out a lot better. And I really feel for them. And if expansion ever comes along again, and with possible rising games, I think they will. I think San Diego definitely deserves to be on the top of the list. I mean, it's a great city, it's a great venue, and I know they could find an area to build a stadium. And they're a very passionate fan base. So for me, it's kind of like how Seattle got dealt with in the NBA. You feel for them. You knew there was passion there. You still see it. And you hope in the long term maybe something will come up and maybe they'll be able to get involved again. It just seemed just unfair. And that's just how the nature of the business goes. And maybe it'll come up. Maybe San Diego will get an extension team. Maybe the Chargers will move back. I don't know. I just feel like through that whole process, San Diego just deserved so much better. And we'll just wait and see what happens. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining me on the Power Hour today. It was a great morning show. I'm glad that you made the time and stopped by. I would just love to let you know that I appreciate everybody coming on and just giving their input. I definitely plan on wanting to get some of your questions in, and I definitely want to get some ideas, because I want to get the show a little more interactive, and I plan on to. Everything right now is just kind of a feeling out process. It's going to continue to grow. I'm going to continue to get this show on its feet. I'm happy we're on YouTube today. Thank you for joining me. And I definitely want to make sure that you all have a wonderful day today, and to come back tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. We'll be back on YouTube and on Facebook. I'm Michael Bishop with the Power Hour. Have a great day and an even better tomorrow.